This week's Saturday night movie was a film I'd been looking forward to seeing for some time and finally got round to it, and it's Nicolas Roeg's 1980 Bad Timing. I'm a huge fan of Nicolas Roeg. I think he's one of the great, maybe unsung British filmmakers, and he had an amazing launch to his career at the start of the 70s. He directed Performance, Walkabout, Don't Look Now, and The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is an amazing first run of movies. Bad Timing was the start of a downturn in his fortunes. It was quite a controversial movie when it was made. It was funded by the Rank organisation, which had been best known up to that point as making the Carry On films. And they were clearly quite keen on branching out. So they funded this movie, and when they saw it, they declared that it was a sick film for sick people. It struggled to get release, and it was the start of a downward turn for Nicolas Roeg, particularly during the 80s. He started the 90s with a film version of Roald Dahl's The Witches, which doesn't have any of his familiar style. It was very much a work-for-hire job, I think partly also to make something for his children. And although it was a hit, it didn't translate into more commercial freedom for him, and by the mid-90s he had effectively retired from filmmaking. He made one more movie, Puffball, in 2007, and then died last year. But Bad Timing I found interesting. It's the story of a psychology professor who develops an affair with an American woman who is married to a Slovak man during the time of the Cold War, and the story itself is based in Vienna, which is, I think, barely 20 miles from the border with then Soviet-instructed Czechoslovakia. So it has this unusual setting of Vienna and quite unusual casting, in that the psychology professor is played by Art Garfunkel. Garfunkel is actually a pretty good actor. It wasn't his first role by any means. He'd been in Catch-22 10 years earlier, and he would be in the occasional recurring film role for many years to come. Theresa Russell plays the woman he becomes obsessed with, Malena, and the film is told in a deliberately fractured style, which is very much Roeg's signature, that he fractures the time scale of his stories, and scenes are joined together not chronologically but instinctually by sort of stream of consciousness. One thing connects to another, regardless of whether or not it follows it in strict chronological terms. So the story begins with Malena having taken an overdose and being taken to hospital, and as the professor, Alex Linden, is interrogated by a police officer, played by Harvey Keitel, about the circumstances of the apparent suicide attempt, we see in flashback the story of their relationship, but not necessarily in chronological order, and the story of what's happening after the overdose. And it's an interesting film for trying to be different. It could easily have been set in East and West Berlin. Instead, it's set in Bratislava and Vienna. You could have had a well-known actor in the lead role. Instead, you have Art Garfunkel, a musician, in a completely non-musical role. But it does feel a bit like Roeg is spinning his wheels. It doesn't feel like it has a huge amount to say. It's about this man becoming increasingly obsessed with a woman who cannot be controlled, who is already married to someone else, but who has an open marriage and is sort of free to sleep with other men on this side of the Iron Curtain, with her husband's consent, her husband being played by no less than Denholm Elliot. And as he becomes increasingly obsessed, his behaviour becomes more and more worrying and dangerous. But it doesn't feel like it has anything wildly original to say. It's competently made, it's interesting in terms of its presentation, the performances are very good, I think Art Garfunkel is very good. Ultimately, I don't think it's much more than Roeg just trying to keep his hand in, making sure that he's continuing to work. It was nice to see that Rank was willing to gamble on him at a time when the British film industry was starting to go into decline. And the fact that they rejected it out of hand indicates the perhaps paucity of their ambition. There are ways that they could have made this perhaps a bit more successful. successful than it was. Ultimately, it's a practice run for other work by Roeg. His besties were maybe already behind him, even though he would later do some really interesting work. Like, he would even collaborate with Dennis Potter on a film called Track 29, which is very much worth seeing. But for this, it's an exercise, ultimately, and there's better work to see